COP28 in the UAE will deliver the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement. I think we all know that this process will highlight insufficient collective progress towards a 1.5 aligned pathway. The global stocktake, however, must be about more than just pointing to the gaps in climate action. It should be about solutions to closing those gaps between now and 2030. And young people must be included in shaping those solutions, especially since they will be among the ones to implement them. With 7 months to go until the world arrives in Dubai for COP28, the UAE remains committed to inclusion in line with our belief in the potential of youth's positive disruption, in which embedding young people horizontally in every sector and field instead of treating youth as a siloed group. 50% of the UAE's population is below the age of 35, which makes me older than all of them. We simply cannot build a future that doesn't include half the population in policymaking. As a result, the UAE has established over 150 youth councils. So Emirati youth are on every decision-making table across all fields at federal, local, and hopefully global levels. Drawing on our national experience, we are approaching COP28 with an attitude of positive disruption so that young people are given the opportunity to be at every table and help make every decision. The average age of the COP presidency team is 36 years old, and 60% of them is from the global south. We look forward to hearing and learning from young leaders today, and we are acutely aware of the need to find more ways for meaningful youth input into the COP process. The COP28 presidency and Youth Champion have already announced some flagship initiatives, including a global consultation series to bring underheard youth into the COP planning, and our International Youth Delegate Program, which will train and fully fund to attend COP 100 civil society youth from small island states, least developed countries, indigenous communities, and other key groups most affected by the climate crisis. Therefore, the Youth Climate Champion team is here participating at the ECOSOC Youth Forum and is keen to speak to everyone interested in helping to amplify young people's climate participation, voice, and action for COP28. To our partners, we encourage you to keep engaging with young leaders on the road to COP and including their innovative ideas into the negotiations. And to all the young people here today, we thank you for continuing to hold us accountable. We call on you to push us to raise the ambition of our climate goals. And more importantly, we salute your tireless work towards outcomes that meet the moment from COP, including through climate projects and initiatives on the ground in your countries. We'll continue to look to your guidance throughout the year as we work towards some shared achievements and progress at COP28 later this year in Dubai. And once again, we are pleased to host this exchange in the UAE mission, and I wish you all a very productive event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alwari. So, by show of hands, who went to COP27? Raise your hands. Okay, hopefully we'll have everyone's hands up for COP28. Just reflecting on what Mr. Alwari just mentioned, if I can have my colleagues from the Youth Climate Champion and COP28 team raise your hands. Yeah, 3? Okay, 4. So we're very keen to hear from you, so please come find us after the event. Make sure you learn our names because we mean it. We really want to make sure to listen to you all to make sure that youth engagement is a key priority at COP28. So again, thank you so much, and now I'd like to hand it over to my co-moderator, Julia.
And thank you, Fernando. Actually, I would like to invite to the podium Ruth Miller from Whirlwind Women Climate Consulting. Please, Ruth, come to the podium.
Yahlidu, everyone. I'm going to ask you to please stand if that's accessible. We're going to start with blessing this space and opening it up in a good way.
Yuki udomata haye yuki udomata haye yuki udomata haye yuki udomata haye yuki udomata hutauma 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 haye yuki udomata 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 hutauma 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 haye yuki udomata haye yuki udomata.
Chinan Khali, thank you for joining me in that blessing. Feel free to be seated. Oh, that's okay. Shivaik isinch ijich u deni ina kanaga sheltkun kanash chiriang ethninish itech ushtas naka Heather Kendall Miller shunkta ch Lloyd Miller stukta. The blessing that I've just shared with you is a Kashayo Pomo blessing, which was gifted to me by my sister Desiree, and I was given permission to sing that. And it is a blessing over our journeys, particularly in this room. We have all gathered from so many places across the world. And so when I sing this song as a blessing to open this space, it is not only to protect you in your time, in your journey here on these Lenape lands, who are the indigenous stewards of this place, but also to ensure that the messages and the relationships that we are inspired in today are carried with us as we continue to journey throughout our work. But this song is also used to call in miracles. The Kashayo Poma would use this song in the midst of their journeys, and it had been known to be able to part the clouds. And so when I consider what we need as a youth climate movement, we maybe need some big miracles. So to introduce myself, my name is Shivaik Isan. In English, my name is Ruth Miller. I've worked in youth climate advocacy and indigenous rights for about 11 years now. I am of the Dena'ina Nation from Anchorage, Alaska. And I've had the honor of working both with Young-O in the past, as well as, of course, in the COP settings, but also from a grassroots community perspective. I am of my lands, and I carry my people and my ancestors with me, which is why it's so important for me to introduce them to all of you in a space like this. So when I considered opening, I think it's significantly less interesting to talk about me and the things I've done. So instead, I'd like to offer you a cultural story from my people, and I hope that that can help to set the tone for us and direct us in our mission of our conversation today. And so the story that came to me when I looked within is, this will be very abbreviated to stay within our timelines. Our stories often took days to tell. And so this story is of my Dena'ina people. And the reason why it came to me is because it speaks of right relationship. And that's really the core of what we're talking about. How to be in right relationship with youth, how to be in right relationship with one another, with our homelands, with our resources, with our economies, and how to found economies of care that are established on values of respect, compassion, reciprocity, instead of extraction. And so as our traditional story goes, One day, there were two old women walking across the tundra. So imagine colors of deep greens, some reds and blues. They were hunting for ground squirrels to bring home to their families for dinner. One woman was singing a song as she walked. She was calling in blessings on the land. She was inviting the ground squirrels to come out, her relatives that she had been in relationship with for generations. She was grounded in respect. And as she checked her traps, she was finding these beautiful, fat ground squirrels that had offered themselves to her family to keep her well fed. The other woman, however, was seeing this and getting jealous. She was not finding any ground squirrels in her traps, and the ones that were there were small, they were young, they were scrawny, and she was getting frustrated and throwing them aside. So on they walked, one woman praying, one woman centered in respect, and the other getting more and more impatient, more and more irritable, and frustrated, feeling that she was entitled to this food from the land. She was entitled to the lives of these ground squirrels, and she couldn't understand why these scrawny little things were the only things getting stuck in her traps. And so the first woman, eventually she took all that she needed, did not want to be greedy, and returned home to her family with dinner ready for cooking. The other woman, however, was still hungry, and as her hunger grew, she was getting more and more angry. And eventually, as darkness fell, she found herself lost. She was surrounded by alders and aspens as she climbed across the tundra, until suddenly she came across this mound in the earth, which looked like a large, large ground squirrel nest. She was curious and climbed into it, thinking she might find food there. And within it, instead of food, she found a small fire burning. And next to that fire sat a beautiful woman carrying a baby in her arms. She said nothing, and as the old woman crept closer, she saw that that baby was being choked. It was being tortured. It could not speak. It was crying. And this woman was attempting to comfort it, was holding it in tenderness and in love. But when this woman made eye contact with the elder, that elder knew that this was her fault. She knew that she had caused the suffering of this young youth that was attempting to grow, that was struggling to use its voice but could not be heard. She wept and wept. She sobbed, and she understood that this wrong was caused by her disrespect and the way that she had chosen to walk through the world. So as she repented, she came to the youth, and she unburdened its neck. She took the snares away, and it was again able to breathe. And she understood that her behavior must be in alignment with the blessings that she was asking for. She felt that she'd come to a deeper understanding through that experience, and as she began to leave the mound, when she turned back, it had disappeared. And again, she walked across the tundra over the tussocks, finding her way home, and she saw that her traps were full of ground squirrels, and not the scrawny little ones, the youth that she had been throwing carelessly aside, but the elder ground squirrels that had knowingly given up their lives to establish this right relationship, this commitment between these two relatives. And so this story came to me for a few reasons, and it speaks to me often in these climate spaces. And the first is because we, in all of our work, whether you consider yourself an environmentalist or an anthropologist or a marine biologist, we're working towards a reciprocal relationship, right relationship, one of respect and care, one where ecosystems can thrive, one where our species are respected and able to exist in the ways that they have always known success before human intervention, right? And so this isn't a relationship of give and take, but rather of give and give, much like this story teaches us. And that is the continuum that we, particularly as Indigenous peoples, are fundamentally a part of. And so that is what I hope to impart with each of you as we continue our conversation about climate policy and youth inclusion. But the second reason why this story speaks to me so much is because at its core is the power of our young people. And it is at its core reminding us that our future meals, our ability to continue sustaining us relies on the respect of our youth. And if we silence our youth, if we choke our youth, if we are unable to respect our youth, then we will go hungry as a people. We will go spiritually hungry. We will go physically hungry, because it is our young people that are our future and have always been imbued with the ability from our communities to steward us. And so with that, I will express my gratitude to Nen Khali, and it is my absolute honor to welcome one of the most remarkable people I know, Ahmed Bader, to the stage.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I told myself in this conference that whatever I do, I shouldn't follow Ruth in anything. But it's an honor to follow you, and thank you all so much for being here. My name is Ahmed Badr, and my story starts on July 25th, 2006 in Baghdad, Iraq. It was the first night I spent away from home. The next day, my dad came to pick me up, and immediately I knew that there was something off. We all know when our parent has some bad news to share, and he took one of those deep parental breaths, and he said, "Ahmed, our house was bombed last night." And as a kid, you don't really know what that means. A week later, we had moved to Syria, which at the time was taking in refugees, and applied for refugee status. And after about a year and a half of interviews, we received a phone call letting us know that we had 4 one-way tickets to the US, and then a whole new journey had begun. Over the last, 7, 8 years, I've really dedicated my life and my work to making sure that displaced young people are able to share their own stories on their own terms. I created an organization that now runs the only US-based fellowship for refugee youth with the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York City. We've been running that program for the past 5 years and really thinking about, as a young person, displaced or otherwise, what does it mean to share your own story on your own terms? About 4 years ago, I began working with the World Bank's Connect for Climate initiative to start to think about, again, this question of what does it mean to share your own story on your own terms, but as a young person interested in climate action and really asking what can I do for myself, for my own community, for my country, and for the world. And so we launched the Youth for Climate Live series back in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, and I had the honor of co-hosting it. And throughout the past 3-4 years, it's been a really remarkable experience as I've kind of learned more about the space. Obviously, the displacement space is something that's very familiar, but the climate space is fairly new. Obviously, those two spaces are intersectional in many different ways. I'll read shortly a poem that was inspired by that series, by that work, and is all around this question of when we are in spaces like this, when we are having these conversations, who is here with us? Who is not here with us, and what does that absence mean, and what can we do to make sure that these spaces are as inclusive as they can be? And so, whether it's leading Narratio and creating those spaces, or working at Wesleyan University, I'm a professor at Wesleyan and lead their social entrepreneurship center, creating spaces for young people to be able to really express themselves and create projects that impact the world. Ultimately, all of those projects continue to ask this question of how can I create spaces for my story to exist, and spaces so that my story can create multiple spaces for other stories to exist beside it and beyond it. And so this poem that I'll read for you is called Representation. What do you hear and who do you hear? What do you see and who do you see? Look around and recognize the stakes of your presence. Look around and recognize the stakes of your absence. This is not another representation poem. This is not another gesture. This is not another invitation. This is a demand. This is acknowledgement. This is accountability. This is a reminder. This is invisible made visible, or this is invisible addressing invincible, or this is resistance to visibility as the only answer. Who do you hear and what do you hear? Who do you see and what do you see? One of many we rise to proclaim, we are not a single story. We can never be a single story. This is not victim. This is not victim. This is not powerless speaking to powerful. This is not angry young person. This is not angry young people. This is not angry young generation. This is consequences speaking. Past, present, and future. What do you hear and who do you hear? What do you see and who do you see? This is not another representation poem. This is not another gesture. This is not another invitation. This is who we are and where we stand. We know where we must go from here. This is not powerless speaking to powerful. This is not angry young person. This is not angry young people. This is not angry young generation. This is consequences speaking. How will you respond? Thank you very much.
Wow, so who's so excited after those incredible stories? All right, come on, come on. That's amazing, that's amazing. And Ruth, we're gonna take you up on the day-long stories. If you can tell us where to meet you, would love that. And here's some more poems by you, Ahmed. That was incredible. And it's such a reminder that climate change is also very personal. And I wanna thank you so much for being vulnerable with us and letting us know how your personal story has impacted your path. And that was very beautiful, so thank you so much for that. So now we're gonna go into our panel discussion, and we have the privilege to hear from various voices of different people that are looking at youth engagement differently. And I think it's very powerful to have very diverse voices in the room with us. So first, I would like to invite our moderator for the panel discussion, Mr. Zan Northcott, who is one of my colleagues at the COP28 Youth Climate Champion, who's gonna be introducing our esteemed panelists. So please give it up for Zan Northcott.
Here we go. Yes. Thank you so much, Fernando and Ruth and Ahmed. That was just such a beautiful way. I think every climate event needs to start with a grounding like that. Really beautiful. Thank you so much. And I want to also invite up onto the stage our panelists. We have Jennifer Baumwall, who is the Global Climate Change Advisor for UNDP. Would you like to come up? We also have Jorge Arturo Rios Badillo, who is the expert on climate, environment, and technologies at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations. Thank you very much. We have Jevanik Henry, a member of the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change and a Alliance of Small Island States Fellow. Thank you. We have Ezra Essam, a climate scientist and Fulbright scholar, and also a member of YOUNGO, the Children and Youth Constituency of the UNFCCC. And we have Asif Nawaz Shah, who is partnership specialist and leading on youth engagement for the COP28 presidency. Thank you, Asif. And just to introduce myself quickly, it's great to see you all. I've been working on youth activism and engagement around COP for around 4 years now. I've been working with YOUNGO for a long time. It's great to see some of the absolute legends of youth climate action in the room today. Found myself in this interesting position this year of going from YOUNGO and the NGO community onto this new Youth Climate Champion team under the presidency. And really, I understand from personal experience that COP over the last few years has really been an experience of hardship for young people. COP26, I was staying in the sketchiest hostel I've ever seen in Glasgow. COP27, I was staying on a sofa covered in mosquitoes. I'm sure all of you in the youth climate space recognize this. And while the youth climate movement has been growing and driving so much impact, that hasn't translated into the same growing respect for young people in decision-making processes and getting the resources that they need. And so that's where this new youth champion position has come from, building on the successes of previous COPs and the establishment of the Conference of Youth and YOUNGO as the youth constituency. The UAE really identified that there's a need for a leading youth figure in the actual COP presidency leadership to drive stronger youth engagement and inclusion across the board. And this new youth champion position is over the year going to really be listening to the voices of young people, including and especially those who won't be able to come to the COP in person, trying to support education and capacity building so every young person can come to COP ready to be able to influence the negotiations on a level playing field, helping young people reach the COP more easily with dignity and respect, and once they get there, actually having the chance to participate in the negotiations in a meaningful way, and really trying to make sure the COP is turning into delivering action for young people on the ground. And the aim of this panel is really for us to hear from the experts we have here and from all of you on how we can really leverage COP to be a success in mobilizing huge resources, support, and impact for young people, and the 2030 SDGs agenda. So thank you so much, speakers, for being here, and thank you to all of you in the room. I'm going to run through a couple of questions for each speaker. I'll ask if everyone can try and keep responses quite short and sharp, and then I want to go to questions from all of you in the audience. But Jennifer, I'll start with you, and want to just begin by recognizing that some of these international, UN processes and the COP, it can seem so broad and abstract and a bit disconnected from what is happening with young people actually on the ground. So I want to ask, how do you think we can better connect grassroots youth projects for climate and SDG-related initiatives at the local level with the international negotiations at COP? And can you tell a bit about how UNDP is working on this?
Great. Well, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to join you for this event today. We are very pleased to co-organize this with the Youth Climate Champion team. And also a huge thanks to the UAA mission for hosting us today, and the director for his words in opening, and really showing the commitment of the UAA presidency for this work. So here we are on the sidelines of the ECOSOC Youth Forum. And we saw, of course, in the opening session, the recognition from the UN Secretary General, the President of the GA, the President of the ECOSOC, on really the power and the critical role of youth in leading on climate action. We see young people already demonstrating this power, the going above and beyond in terms of engaging in climate action, making their voices heard, influencing climate policies. And really, this is often given limited resources, given specific barriers, limited, including discrimination, including lack of information, and so on. But we see this continued commitment, and this is really an inspiration, and something that I think the world really needs more than it's often willing to recognize. And so this question you have in terms of how we connect the dots between what's happening in these major global forum and where what's happening at the local level is so critical. Given UNDP's role, and we have a bit of a unique role in that we are the UN's development arm. We have presence in over 170 countries and territories. We're working with governments, communities on the ground, and we also are engaged in these global processes as well as regional processes and so on. We have a unique role. We also have an opportunity and a responsibility to help make these connections and really ensure that a lot of what's happening on the ground is informing these discussions, but at the same time, the discussions are really grounded and really translated so they are relevant and help to advance the work that's happening on the ground. And I'd say there are three ways that UNDP is doing this that I'll highlight, which I think also speaks to where we can look for further opportunities in making this connection. So the first is through leveraging what we have, the NDC processes, and I speak specifically to that because one of UNDP's flagship initiatives, the Climate Promise, is really focused on supporting countries to advance their NDCs, both in raising their ambition as well as strengthening their implementation. We are the world's largest offer of support to developing countries, and we've seen an advance and progress in terms of how countries have managed to use NDCs, not just as a requirement of a convention, but really as a place where you can bring different stakeholders to the table, really define what is a priority for countries and what the pathway looks like towards this net zero pathway. And I think we're starting to see that youth are more increasingly engaged in those processes. Through our climate promise support, 60% of the countries were taking very concrete action to bring youth to the table and involved in a lot of these discussions and target setting. We saw, for example, in Zimbabwe, this work actually led to a specific youth desk that was set in the Ministry of Environment, where that youth concerns were being brought to the NDC, but then even beyond to other environmental policies. So we really do see an impact there. And this is this first point about youth really needing to have the systematic channels and processes for really informing a lot of these policies. The second is really around creating and facilitating the space for youth movements, youth leaders, organizations to engage and come together on these issues. This is in progress. This is something that UNDP has been particularly active in. We are directly supporting local and regional convenings through the Conference of Youth COIs in the lead up to COP, through our Youth for Climate initiative, which brought together 200 youth leaders. And this is really where a lot of the local experiences that are happening can build and engage and really become greater than the sum of their parts. And this is not just youth speaking to youth. This is also, we're supporting youth to engage in these global processes directly, making sure that there's representation and delegations at COP, at Stockholm Plus 50, UNSC Regional Weeks, and other forum. So this idea that youth really need a seat at the table and really need to be there. And then finally, very quickly, really looking at not just the engagement in those global forums, but ensuring that the momentum and the work that youth are leading on the ground is supported sufficiently. A lot of times we hear that the biggest challenge is the resources, the access to resources, finance capacity to really take this forward on the ground, and to be an active and engaged contribution to the global policy discussions. We really need to sufficiently support youth at the local level, and so there's quite a lot going on within UNDP to do that as well. So sorry if I went a little long, but just to say there's quite a lot happening. These are just a few examples, but I think it'll be great to discuss and hear about where there are further opportunities, and we can build on some of these areas that I highlighted. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I want to pick up on how you mentioned, having really truly meaningful ways to include youth in decision making. We actually got in the COP26 cover decision agreed by every UN member state that youth should be included in climate decision making at the local, national, and international level. So I want to move now to Jorge, because I think Mexico is really a world leader in terms of youth inclusion. And can you share a bit on your thoughts? What do you think is the benchmark for meaningful inclusion of young people in climate decision making, again, at the local, regional, and international level?
For including the Mexican mission in these very important and timely discussions. And of course, I would like to thank the United Arab States mission for hosting us today. Answering your question, for Mexico, there is no doubt. Youth must have full, meaningful, and effective participation in the solutions and in the decision-making process. There is something that I think that we all agree on that. Particularly on those of historical significance on issues such as, among others, climate change. The young persons, are part of the future generations that will live, enjoy, or suffer the consequences of the work that we do at local, national, and international level. So that is why your voices are the key for an effective multilateralism. The climate emergency urges us to think and to do things different, because business as usual have had few or poor results to tackle this challenge. I believe that there is a beautiful energy that manifests in the new generations and movements with the desire for things to change. I also think that it's very positive because it is a sign that the world can still be modified, that this reality that we face together is a challenge, not a destiny. So, but it's not only about having your voice into the table. You have to have the spaces for a real action, and we as governments must facilitate the spaces in order that you can design and implement the solutions that we really need to tackle these spaces. So in Mexico, we have elaborate the different initiatives, and maybe I can elaborate more in the next phase. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, and really absolutely applaud Mexico's leadership there. And yeah, so we've heard a bit about supporting youth action on the ground and youth in policy making. Now we need to hear from the young people. And really want to turn to you, Ezra. And we saw some big successes from COP27 last year, and Youngo has been playing an amazing role elevating the influence of youth in the negotiations. But I think we would all agree there's a long way to go. And some big gaps and challenges that youth face, and barriers to meaningful inclusion. So I want to put to you, how do you think COP28 can bring transformational change for young people in climate change negotiations?
Hello, can you hear me? All right, so I would like you to be part of answering this question, if you don't mind. So first of all, if you feel that you are that person, I'm going to ask questions now. Please raise your hand. So the first question is, who or which one of you feel the responsibility towards climate action and making our life more greener? Oh, full room, that's amazing. Okay, the second question is, please be honest in that question. Who touched a plastic today? Who touched a plastic today? Okay, all of us, I think. All right, the last and the most important question, which is, who own electric vehicle or electric bike? 1, 2, 3. Oh no. All right. So I honestly asking you these questions to just let you know that making changes is not an easy thing. However, as long as we just feel the responsibility to do some changes and feel the responsibility that we are responsible for what's going on, and we have voices and our voices should be heard. So get back to your question for the transformational change. I think that youth has a great impact on society. They have the power to make change. So COP28 is a great and huge opportunity for all of us, and for youth especially, as I can say that youth play a significant role in keeping pressure on decision makers to be more ambitious in climate plans, and also to ensure that the opinions and voices from all youth are just not only heard, but also considered and reflected in the decisions. So policies and dialogues in COP28, as it's the only way forward. So by the youth initiatives and programs that's been launched after COP28 to emphasize the young people's perspectives are the heart of global policy making on climate change. And also by negotiating and discussing the positive climate ideas and climate projects that's been implemented. Furthermore, by learning the positive outcomes of previous COPs. So I hope COP28 can find long-term structure for youth inclusion, for instance, by building a long-term structure for free capacity building ahead of COP, and finding long-term mechanism to support youth in most affected countries, and also ensure LCOI, COI, and GYS and youth policy are magnificently heard and feeding into the negotiations. So I believe COP28 is another chance for us, to just make our voices heard, and also our views and proposals to be fully integrated into global climate policy making and dialogues. So I think all of that will assist in bringing transformation and change for young people in climate negotiation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ezra. And I want to come next to Jevenik. First of all, I want to say a huge congratulations on your appointment to the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group. An amazing achievement. And the Youth Advisory Group play an amazing role now in driving youth climate action across the UN agenda and the UN system and at the grassroots. And I think the Secretary General himself has really emerged as a key ally for people in the climate space. So you'll have an amazing influence on him. So I wanted to ask you, what are your main priorities for the advisory group this year? And what do you hope the Secretary General will be promoting this year? And I want to add a quick follow-up for you specifically, given your role with AOSIS. We obviously know small islands face probably the most dire impacts of climate change. And so do you have any specific priorities regarding small island nations this year? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Anne. Good day, everybody. In fact, before I answer your question, just going back to what Jennifer from UNDP was speaking about, facilitating the space. And those of you who know, I always like to start with a story. So actually, one of my very first involvement through the climate space was actually through UNDP back when I was at uni. I was probably looking for an excuse to get out of school, but actually with the UNDP office in the Eastern Caribbean and Barbados, where they sort of brought together young people from across the Caribbean region. It was at a critical time years ago, because oftentimes that sort of Caribbean voice was absent. So that was sort of one of my very first involvements, and from there, of course, I've progressed and grown on. So I'm very appreciative for that. But going back to your questions, and this is the priorities, and looking at it from a current context, one, we know, for example, with the recent IPCC report, we are not on track. Yes, we are making progress, but essentially, the current progress will be a death sentence for small islands like mine and many others across the world, right? So that is why, through our sort of recommendations which we provide to the Secretary General, we're supporting that effort to ensuring that there is that increased ambition towards closing that emissions gap. We know what is required. The science has told us that. Some policymakers are telling us this is what is required. We, private sector is some sort getting there, but the youth voice is there. And I often say, if we can agree that the lawyers are telling us we need to do this, the scientists and some governments, if all three are friends, then there's a rationale for it. So definitely we'll be supporting the call to sort of raise ambition that would allow us to close that emission gap, which is certainly needed, filtering out fossil fuels and so on. There's no question on that. But also, I think one that is dear to my heart, delivering on the climate justice. And it's probably going to sound like a repeated chorus from me, but of course this year for us, operationalizing the loss and damage fund is not only an option, it is essential, because odds are 5 years down the line, I may not be here with you. My island, I will not be able to speak from my island. And we heard about the issues of displacement. And that is a growing concern, particularly from a security standpoint. Because what happens when one of our islands, just like we saw a couple of years ago with Barbuda in the Caribbean, when literally everybody on the island had to sort of, move or migrate. So there is that issue from the climate justice standpoint, and of course we are going to be pushing that messaging for young people, with your support. After all, we cannot do it alone. That is why for our first month thus far, we have engaged in intense consultations with various groups so far, and we'll continue the consultations, because that is the primary step that would allow us to sort of, take forward successfully that mandate. And thirdly, of course, we sort of zero tolerance for greenwashing. I did not spend much time on that. We need to end it. There's no question about it. But yeah, like I said, particularly from the small and developing states, I know I'm out of time. It's a case where we are at a critical point where, and I mean, we know the rhetoric, but there are the solutions, and I think that is what, in the next couple of years, we need to focus on. How do we scale up the solutions? How do we support the innovative ideas? We know the issue, scientists are telling us this, we know what needs to be done, but let us focus on more, on driving the solutions, and of course, that positive disruption, which was mentioned earlier, to ensure that we can get the required ambition, to lower the emissions, close the emissions gap, deliver climate justice, and of course, to end greenwashing. Full stop. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you so much, and very excited to see all these efforts get underway. And I want to come now to Asif. Asif, you've heard a bit about what's happening from UN experts, from member states, and from young people. And so I want to hear from you as we look ahead to COP28. How is the COP28 presidency going to work together with this new Youth Climate Champion role and team to ensure full participation and engagement of young people at the COP?
Thanks, Nan. And thank you, everyone, and especially to my fellow panelists and participants today for sharing your experiences and work and stories. Honored to be in your presence. I want to start by saying that inclusion is really at the heart of the COP28 presidency in terms of how we want to design our agenda and deliver real outcomes within the global stocktake process that is set to conclude this year. So it's incredibly important, it's a priority for the presidency to ensure that perspectives across different sectors and different groups within society are included, especially youth. And that's why this role of the Youth Climate Champion is so critical this year, because I think Jen said youth are already demonstrating and have already demonstrated a great deal of influence and power around the climate policy process. You've seen it at COP26 with Article 65, you saw it at COP27 with Article 55. You've seen it with the institution of the ACE action plan. Youth have been able to put things on the agenda that platform the issues that mean the most to them. And as the presidency, we're going to be supporting as much as we possibly can in ensuring that those decisions and those mandates are upheld and taken forward by our fellow parties, and that we ourselves are making the appropriate efforts to expand access to those tools, those resources, those networks that are so critical to enable youth to take the transformative action that we know they can and already are taking. To do that, we're supporting the YCC in making sure we're consulting youth across our entire COP28 agenda and embedding their perspectives and their priorities across mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, finance, really breaking that siloed approach that we believe is misguided and does not lead to the results that we need to get where we need to get. That's from a policy perspective, but we also recognize a responsibility to ensure that the experience young people have at COP28 is one that is in line with the experience everyone else has and is of a high standard. And so we want to ensure that from a logistical perspective and an operational perspective, youth perspectives are honored. Youth have spaces at COP28 where they can work, where they can rest, where they can actually participate meaningfully in the COP28 process. And we're dedicated to working with, obviously, Yango as the youth constituency to make that happen. And we're also dedicated to ensuring that the way our program develops integrates youth perspectives across every single pillar of that program. And it's not just something that's seen on the Youth Day at COP28. It's something, it's palpable across all 2 weeks of that program. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Asif, and I'm sure there might be some questions for you at the end, but can I do a quick second round of questions for all of you? Would ask for this round if try and keep the responses really nice and short and sharp so we can hear from the audience. But following up as we zoom in a bit on the COP, Jennifer, what are your hopes for member states in terms of the climate policy outcomes for COP this year? What do you think would be a success, and particularly regarding NDCs, given we have the first global stocktake? What are you hoping to see from countries this year?
Great, thank you. It's a really great question, especially as we're it's a heavy calendar, and we know that seems to be a new summit coming every week. So keeping a focus and figuring out what is it that we want to focus our attention on, I think is quite useful. I would say my hope is really around recognizing the tools and mechanisms that we have already, and particularly the NDCs as this powerful tool for advancing the agenda. I think we're really at a critical moment when it comes to NDCs. Countries have now gone through this second revision. There has been an increase in ambition, as we heard, not quite where we need to be, but the mechanism is working. Now we need to move to implementation. And this is really where at least UNDP's focus is now in terms of taking this pledge, making sure that it's not just something on paper, but actually turning it into action. And we see that countries are recognizing that and seeing NDCs not just as a piece of paper, but really as a guide, a blueprint for where the investments can be made in a range of sectors that are also driving development. So seeing that the kind of business case for advancing NDCs is so critical. When it comes to the global stocktake, and we heard from the UAE representative earlier, this is such an important process, not just to mark where we are in terms of progress on NDCs, but really to outline how we move forward. What is it that we need to do? What have we seen is working? What isn't working? And how do we advance that? And this is where I think the youth input is so critical, as we heard. But this is really the opportunity to say, this is what we're already doing, because there's so much happening. We really need to advance this. And then, of course, it's finance. When it comes to NDCs, if we're not investing in NDCs, it really starts to undermine the entire mechanism. And then, countries, at least especially the countries that we're working with, question what's the incentive for furthering an ambition? What's the incentive for continuing to advance on our targets? So really looking at how we can bring investment to NDCs as well is critically important. And so, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Jorge, one of the key outcomes from the COP27 cover decision was calling on parties to include youth in their delegation. I wanted to ask you, how is Mexico ensuring young people are part of Mexico's delegation to the COP? And how do you think the stakeholders here in this room can best help advocate for more countries to adopt best practices for including youth in their delegations and decision-making for COP?
Thank you. I mentioned it some minutes ago, that the importance of not just giving you the space of raising your voices, but actually facilitate the spaces for you to participate. And to bring this energy and these new ideas that you have, the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in coordination with the Mexican Youth Institute, the National Institute of Indigenous Peoples, and the Climate Reality Project in Latin America, they have promoted and implemented an initiative called Operation COP, Youth Ambassadors for the Climate. This is an initiative that we have implemented since 2021. This initiative offers to young persons the train and learning about climate change, and as well the opportunity to participate in the most important event of the matter, which is the Conference of the Parties of UNFCCC. For example, in 2022, with the support of UNICEF in Mexico, 35 young persons were trained, and at the end of the day, 4 delegates were selected and joined to the Mexican delegation in Sharm el-Sheikh. This election was made under the perspective of gender balance. So we have half of the young delegates were men and half women. And we also incorporated a specific category for indigenous and Afro-Mexican delegates. Why are we doing things like this? Because we consider that this is really important to foster a gender-responsive approaches in the climate action. And it's also equally important to include indigenous peoples and local communities in the decision-making of these processes. At the end of the day, indigenous peoples are the guardians of the ecosystems, particularly in a country like Mexico, which is a mega diverse country. So that is why we are working with this perspective. Likewise, our young delegates become negotiation leaders. Then that is the importance to have their voices into the table. For example, they were in charge of negotiations on issues as empowerment, in negotiations on adaptation, loss and damage, and as mentioned by my colleague here, on the global stocktake process. So they are actually negotiating on behalf of the Mexican government, but also they are providing us new ideas on how to foster and improve our climate action. Operation COP also seeks to be an engine that promotes creativity and innovation. It also allows us to promote the Mexican feminist foreign policy, to put into practice the youth perspective as an urgent paradigm shift where the adult-centrism and machismo are completely out of all politics. So this is our important part of this initiative, and where human rights and the empowerment of the most vulnerable are at the center of our actions. And finally, we are working with other countries. We are working with the Netherlands government also for knowledge sharing and sharing best practices to also promote these type of initiatives in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think really it's the gold standard to have young people actually leading the negotiations, and just want to thank you and applaud you for that. If every country had the equivalent young people leading their efforts, I'm sure we would see much accelerated progress in the COP. So thank you, and looking forward to working with you over this year. But I want to come back to Ezra. Can you tell us a bit more, what is Youngo working on leading up to COP28? And how can the COP28 Youth Champion and the development partners and other people here present support Youngo's efforts?
Hello again. So, okay, Youngo is one of 9 officially recognized constituencies of the UNFCCC, and it is the oldest and the largest volunteer-run children and youth constituencies to a UN body. So through a journey of Youngo in previous COPs, we were just making sure that every youth is participating, has a room, has a space in the room. And also, we just working on raising the awareness and shared knowledge and also building capacity. So on our way to COP28, Youngo will run the Conference of Youth, which is the COI, that will happen a couple of days. It usually happens a couple of days before the COP. And also the COI, which is the Local Conference of Youth, which is the national or the local version of the COI. So their main goal is just to empower youth and formally bring their voices to the UNFCCC processes to shape the intergovernmental climate change policy. So the major 4 components that will be discussed is the policy document, the capacity building, skills building, workshops, and culture exchange. So as you all know, that all the young people and youth will be engaging from all around the world and different cultures. So to be able to engage with youth in these initiatives, we would need funding and resources for the COI to just facilitate the youth participation and grassroots action work. So in addition, we need also government support to implement the agreements of COP27, what we agreed on the previous COP, and include young people in the delegation and negotiation. So Youngo is going to participate in the COP28 as spokes council, and also will engage in briefing and dialogue by UNFCCC, high-level champions, and SP chairs. In addition, Youngo will also coordinate meetings and events with parties and grouping, and lastly, by engaging in press conferences and events, and also plan actions, and finally, networking with climate advocate. So the other part of the question to just how the COP28 Youth Climate Champion, development partners, and other support Youngo's ongoing efforts. So all the youth platforms should all come in one hand for one, we are just agreed on one crisis, so we all should come in one hand and find the solution for it and make sure that our voices are heard. So there should be a collaboration between the youth platform, all youth platforms, and also policymakers. We cannot make our voices heard without the policy. There should be a policy, not only just to hear our voices, but also to take serious and implement serious actions in order to confront this issue. So COP28 is a chance to collaborate between youth and policymakers and stakeholders and development partners. So this all will support Yongo's main goal, which is to support and to make sure that to have a room and a space for each youth to represent. So lastly, I would like to highlight that as we are not only victims to this crisis, we are part of the solution. So hence we have the moral obligation and the right in the climate process and to sit in the table when decisions are taken. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezra. And Jevanik, want to come back to you. How are you going to work to ensure there's alignment of efforts on the climate side with the broader SDG agenda? And also, how do you think we can make this sustainable beyond the 2-year term you have with the Youth Advisory Group?
Yeah, thanks, Zan. You know, I wish we could have just asked the ChatGPT how to solve the climate crisis, and our job would be easy. But sadly, it's not the case. But in response to your question, the interesting thing I tend to say is that not everything is climate change, but climate change impacts everything. So, which is why, if I go back to the sort of priorities, top line priorities, which we highlighted, if we are able to sort of close the emissions gap, right, and make progress in terms of mitigation and so on, inevitably we would be scaling up the use of renewable energy and so on. So eventually then we make progress on SDG 7. Similarly, if we deliver on the climate finance goal, like we continue to make with noise for actually, then in building that resilience, communities are able to then sort of, address poverty issues and so on. Similarly, of course, one of, not my favorite, but the loss and damage fund, for example, that in addressing that, countries which already have such a limited fiscal space due to these disasters and so on, the unavoidable risks of climate change, they are then able to allocate more funding towards improving health and education. So you see that linkage between the sort of priorities we're pushing and how it influences on other SDGs. And that is why I keep saying that climate change is not everything, but it will impact every other sector. So which is why these strategic priorities would allow that creation of that enabling environment, improving the fiscal space within the government space, that will allow them to prioritize the other sectors which I would have mentioned. And one thing which also, in terms of the sustainability, as my colleague from Mexico would have mentioned, that knowledge sharing aspect. And that is why we this International Youth Delegate Program, it can be a model example, which imagine 100 young people, 100 young champions. We may see it as only 100, but we've seen the influence of maybe one young person can do in influence in the world. So imagine we have 100 young people, perhaps next year as well, when we push, another 100, and that there's not a snowball effect, and that is sort of ties into the sustainability agenda that we're pushing, which is why we're trying to ensure that we engage with as many youth groups, youth constituencies as possible, but also ensuring that there's capacity building as a priority, and then we will leveraging our support with other partners to ensure that beyond just the 7 of us, but we are able to engage and build the capacity of young people to not only, create that positive disruption, but that long-term impact that will allow us to not only achieve the climate goals, but the wider sustainable development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, brilliant response. And then last question, and then we're going to come to you, I promise. But Asa, very quickly, looking towards the longer term for yourself as well. You talked about the plans for this year, but what does the COP28 presidency hope will be its legacy related to youth engagement for the longer term?
Thanks, Anne. Well, first off, I think a recurring theme across my 4 fellow panelists is capacity building. Youth aren't just victims, right? As Ezra rightly said, they are a major part of the solution. And for that to be recognized within the COP process, we need to make sure that inclusion always goes hand in hand with opportunity and the resources that youth need. So I think a major goal for us as the presidency is ensuring we're able to set up those open source free capacity building tools and resources that youth desperately need to be able to meaningfully engage with the COP process. like we've started this year with the International Youth Climate Delegates Program you mentioned earlier, which is funding 100 global youth from SIDS, LDCs, indigenous communities, and other most affected peoples and areas. So that's the kind of precedent we want to set when it comes to inclusion at COP. I think the second piece is related to the role of the Youth Climate Champion itself. I think we realized as a presidency that there's a need and an opportunity to instate a role that is dedicated to serving as a bridge between youth-led organizations and youth climate action, including Youngo, and the presidency and parties to the UNFCCC, much like the high-level champion role was set up to serve as a bridge and connect the efforts of non-state actors like cities, businesses, regions with parties to the UNFCCC. And I think one example of a way that role becomes really critical is how the local conferences of youth and the regional conferences of youth and the conference of youth are integrated more within the mechanics and workings of COP, the COP process itself, so that youth aren't just presenting their statement separately, but that statement is being heard within the COP process as well.
Thank you so much, and give me one more round of applause for all of our panelists and the brilliant responses. Sadly, we don't have too much time, but I want to hear at least from maybe 3 of you in the audience. We'll just take your questions all in one go. And I have a couple of questions from online I'm going to read out as well. And then I'll let all of the panelists give a brief response to whichever questions best suit you. So yeah, let's go for it. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Mela Shamrani. I'm a youth participant in the ECOSOC and I'm from Saudi Arabia. I was really inspired by the discussion by the panel, and I actually remembered a story that I had in high school. So I remember I founded like an environmental awareness club in the school, and I tried to make an impact to like raise environmental awareness. So like we planted around like 300 trees in playgrounds and stuff, but something I noticed is that after I graduated, the impact was not long lasting. So unfortunately, although like I tried my best to like recruit people to the club, the impact was not as long lasting as I did when I founded the club. So my question for you is, how do you think we can make sustainable impacts, and how can we make our voice long lasting more than temporary? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more? Go ahead.
Can you? Okay. Hi, I have the pleasure for being into COPs in Glasgow and also in Sharm el-Sheikh. And in every single COP, I see like the same problem between the youth participation or statements, and that's because of my question. So my question is, how can you encourage like the youth people that attend COP to be involved with the negotiator part of the country? I mean, I'm from Mexico, being part of the Mexican delegation or of any other type of delegation, but when they return to the country, because in COP, they're like, yeah, we're going to make that and that and that, and we're going to start making a lot of policies, and we're going to give a lot of money and fund to start making international community for climate change and to climate action and all that. But when they like return to each country, it's very difficult to make those international agreements possible because of the national policies, even because of the culture or many type of different problematics that each country has. So yeah, that's my question. How can we as youth get involved but in the national agreements after COP to start making those agreements real and not being just discussed in an international way and in an international panel just for being politically correct about climate change, but they do not have a real impact?
Great question.
Yeah, thank you. I actually wanted to continue on that with just a small remark. We've all been actually proposing for actually youth engagement in COP process, so quite a lot. Even the pavilion happened in Egypt. Actually, we are constantly facing the UNFCCC and a team of negotiators. Quite a complicated process to, let's say, make it an all part still, so youth is vibrant. And maybe as a result of the UAE presidency in a UNFCCC, it might be very well accepted if UAE might push forward on UNFCCC level official, let's say, how to say, maybe some legal framework, maybe part of UNFCCC meeting the youth hot wave and including it as a compulsory element to include youth into the policy-making process. Like UNFCCC said, there has to be certain amount of young people engaged into the process from each convention member. And that would be really helpful and, I'd say, universal. And this is some tangible result that might be facilitating youth in the following. So just a suggestion, maybe you would take it up. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I also, so we have how can we create long-term impact with climate projects in action? How can we help youth influence national efforts before and after COP? And can we have parties engaging youth as a compulsory element of the process? I also want to recognize some of our friends watching on Zoom have put in a couple of questions. One is, how can a young person be able to participate in COP28? And the second one is, what are the measures for involving indigenous communities in COP28? I can maybe speak at the end a bit about these on the Youth Champion side, but I want to come first to the panel. Does anyone want to take a stab at one of those questions? Asif?
I can perhaps address a couple of the ones that came in online and the last one that came in on mandating youth representation. I think when it comes to youth representation within the UNFCCC process and kind of formalizing youth representation within delegations, ultimately what the presidency's goal is and approach is to work with parties in as consultative a process as possible and encourage them to meet the commitments that they've made in the past COP processes, right? So within COP26 and COP27, the language that was included within the decision text to include more youth within delegations and within the climate policy design and implementation process. I feel like when it comes to creating a mandate for or quotas for specific amounts of groups to be reflected within national delegations, that potentially goes into a territory which the UNFCCC convention is not built to actually deliver. But what I think the presidency is definitely aligned with the need to encourage and promote greater and more meaningful youth representation within delegations. And not just representation, but also enhancing access to the tools and resources that will prepare those young delegates to lead negotiations and meaningfully engage moving forward. So that's on that front. I think on the other two, how can youth participate at COP28? Well, there will be obviously green zone at COP28 where non-accredited youth can take part and engage, and the program for that will also be announced in the coming weeks and months. When it comes to the blue zone, obviously we would encourage you to engage through Youngo and other youth-led organizations that will be participating in the process. We have obviously launched a couple of youth delegate programs, the deadlines for which are now closed, but those are mechanisms we've set up with the view to have long-term impact and sustainability. I think the last question quickly on indigenous peoples, we are very, very cognizant of the role of indigenous peoples and local communities in the COP process and the importance of including them within the design of the COP28 agenda. So I'm part of the team that works with indigenous peoples and local communities to ensure that their views and perspectives are integrated via their constituency. So the COP28 presidency is committed to ensuring that all perspectives from groups that are underrepresented or most affected by the climate crisis are included and represented.
Thanks so much. I was going to add something, but yeah, go ahead, Ezra.
Yeah, I just want to add to her question. So first, can you tell me your name again? I'm sorry. Okay, Manal, thank you so much for contributing, and thank you so much for doing something amazing in your society. So in order to be more sustainable, as you just asked it, how this, as I already did that, but now it's not going on. So let me just tell you something. Now you're making a positive impact. Don't ever lose hope. Keep doing what you're doing, because what you're doing, the small things really matter. And also this will lead to a huge impact in the future. You know what? As youth, we will definitely make a huge, forcing the stakeholders and policymakers to change the rules. We have the right to change the rules. So don't ever lose that hope. You can be a policymaker one day and you can change everything. So thank you so much for contributing and making a great impact in your society.
Thank you. I'll try to provide some answers to two questions, because they're a really good question. If I have the exact answer, maybe we haven't had this conversation. So, first, how we can enhance the involvement on the implementation of the agreements in our nations, in our governments, because we need to understand two things. One, the agreements that we reach, but we also need to understand that each country has different realities, its own challenge. So in that regard, it's really important, at least in the Mexican perspective, to first implement the agreements, to have the means of implementation to do that. There is a really need of climate financing, capacity building, technology transfer. So those are the things that we need to have in a broader way, the means to make a reality on these agreements. And the second, how we involve in a particular way the youth in the implementation of this. I will speak on the Mexican on the Mexican situation. We are working to have all these linked with the Mexican Institute of Youth, because when we work in collaboration with different areas of the government, it facilitates us the work. So we continue the work with you, with this institute, with the Institute of Indigenous Peoples, and that is why we create these synergies. And it's also important. It's not only about the achievement of the goals that are in the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. We need to create synergies also with the other Rio conventions, the diversification and CBD. That's a really important part. And how to make sustainable impact, I fully agree with you. So my message for you is the next. Make us government to do things different, to implement real game changers. And I would like to thank for all your voices today. So we governments need you to do things different. And if we have time, I would like to share some words of Eduardo Galeano, an Uruguayan writer, my favorite writer. And he said that hopefully we can keep alive the certainty that it is possible to be compatriot and contemporary of everyone who lives motivated by the will for justice and beauty, no matter where and when they born and live, because the map of souls and time have no borders. So with that principle in mind, we, the Mexican government, will try to maintain our close collaboration with youth, and we hope that our initiatives could be small contributions for the empowerment of young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to quickly highlight to that question on national advocacy as well. Make sure you get in touch with Yango and find out more about the LCOI process. That's essentially a national level pre-COP conference for youth. You can get involved in the one happening in your country, or up until the end of next month, you can apply to be the lead organizer for one in your country. And those are all about advocating your own country's government on what you want to see them doing. And so that's a really key opportunity. And I think it connects to this question on, having youth as a sort of compulsory part of the process. It was agreed in the COP decision last year that every single country should have youth in the delegation, and it was agreed in Glasgow the year before by every single country in the world that they should be consulting with young people at the local, national, and international level. So it's really up to young people now to see if they're implementing that or not, and to demand them to implement it if they're not. And really, you can hold your governments accountable on the agreements that they've already made. So if it's not happening in your country, get in touch with Youngo, you can get in touch with our team, and we can help you with those efforts. We really need to wrap up. Sorry, Jennifer, Jevanik, you didn't have a chance. Do you have a 30-second last word you want to do before we go?
Yeah, probably in 10 seconds. Just one question, one response on the national advocacy. It's important to do a stakeholder mapping as well. So beyond governments, they may not necessarily listen to the young people, but look at what are the private sector entities you can partner with, what are the other CSOs you can partner with, and perhaps building that momentum with them, creating that sort of footprint involving in environmental action and so on the ground. Perhaps then it creates that sort of, hey, we need to pay attention to this organization. So just sort of ensure that we do that stakeholder mapping and allow that to sort of create that snowball effect. Yeah, thanks.
Maybe just to say, I think, we talk a lot about COP and that forum, but so much happens before on the way to COP, and actually at that moment, so much is already kind of solidified and happening. So I think all the resources and ideas and everything that's coming from this really impressive panel, I think is important to think about, what it does the path to that look like, and so much happens at the national, local level that needs to then feed up. So yeah, just saying that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for being here, most of all, and all the panelists and speakers for sharing with us. And I think I'll hand back to Fernando to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. If we can give a hand to our panel. And thank you so much to everyone joining us online. We wish you could have been here in person, but hopefully next time. So I have just, I think it's 3 announcements. First of all, I know many of you might want to, keep sharing and talking about this topic. So tomorrow we're going to have a consultation. We have limited spaces, but we really want to have kind of a close discussion with people, with you all, to hear about how the Youth Climate Champion can support youth engagement efforts, and just hear about, what you consider are the priorities for COP28. So I'll send you all an email. Again, it's very limited spaces, so if you want to sign up for that, please do so. It's going to be here tomorrow at the Mission as well. And then we also have a reception tomorrow from 6 to 8, right where you had the lunch earlier, where you're going to have a chance to, again, just mingle with other young people and people that are equally passionate about climate change. So I think that is it. I think if you don't have to rush back to ECOSOC, we're going to take a quick picture in the stairs. So I would invite you to head over there, and of course, enjoy some of the food that's left over. So thank you so much, everyone. Take care.